I'm Sarah, and I thought I understood my family's values until the day my parents cut off my tuition for changing my major from pre-med to engineering, while my sister Emma was starting her second medical school dropout journey with their full financial and emotional support. What happened next shattered everything I believed about fairness, family loyalty, and the true cost of being the responsible child in a family that rewarded failure and punished independence. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat while watching a golden child get endless chances, this story is going to hit deep. And if you've ever wondered what happens when the truth finally comes out about years of favoritism and manipulation, stay with me because this gets intense. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding my family's dynamic is crucial to seeing how twisted this situation really became. Growing up, Emma was always the dreamer, the one with big plans and bigger excuses when those plans fell apart. She was charismatic, charming, and had this ability to make our parents believe that every failure was just a stepping stone to something greater. I was the planner, the one who followed through, who kept my promises and met my commitments without drama or fanfare. When we were teenagers, Emma would promise our parents she'd clean her room, then disappear for hours while I quietly handled my chores, and often hers too. When she failed her driving test 3 times, our parents bought her extra lessons and a new car to celebrate when she finally passed. When I passed on my first try, they handed me the keys to Emma's old beat-up Honda and told me I was lucky to get anything. This pattern continued through high school. Emma would start projects with grand announcements, abandon them halfway through, and somehow emerge as the victim who just needed more support and understanding. I would complete my projects quietly, earn recognition, and watch my parents' attention immediately shift back to whatever crisis Emma had created. But the real division started when we both decided to pursue medicine. I say we both decided, but honestly, I think I chose pre-med because it was expected, and Emma chose it because she loved the idea of being called Dr. Emma. Our parents were thrilled. 2 daughters in medical school was their dream come true, something they could brag about at dinner parties and family gatherings. Emma started at a prestigious private medical school that cost our parents $68,000 per year. I went to our excellent state school where tuition was $18,000 annually. Emma needed the prestige, our parents explained, because she learned differently and needed the smaller class sizes and specialized attention that only an expensive private institution could provide. During Emma's first year, I watched our parents send her care packages weekly, pay for her expensive apartment near campus, and wire her money whenever she called with financial emergencies. When she called crying about the workload, they'd book weekend trips to visit her, taking her to expensive dinners and shopping trips to cheer her up. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my program, making Dean's List consistently and working part-time in a research lab to help with my expenses. When I called home excited about my achievements, the conversations lasted 5 minutes before shifting to concerns about Emma's latest struggles. 18 months into her program, Emma called our parents sobbing. Medical school was too hard, she wasn't ready, she needed to take a break to find herself. Our parents' response shocked me. Instead of disappointment, they showed nothing but support and understanding. Emma was sensitive, they explained, and pushing her would only damage her self-esteem. They'd hold her spot at the medical school and pay the deferment fees while she took time to mature and figure out what she really wanted. Emma moved back home, spent 6 months posting Instagram photos from yoga retreats and art classes that our parents funded, then announced she was ready to return to medical school. Our parents celebrated her decision and wrote another tuition check without hesitation. But here's where the story gets really twisted. During Emma's soul-searching year, I had been diving deeper into my pre-med courses and discovered something unexpected. I loved the problem-solving aspects of medicine, but I was absolutely fascinated by the engineering applications in medical devices and biotechnology. I spent months researching programs, talking to professors, and preparing a presentation for my parents about switching to biomedical engineering. I had data showing that biomedical engineers were in high demand, that the salary prospects were excellent, and that I could still contribute to healthcare while following my genuine passion. I had already been accepted into one of the top engineering programs in the country, and several professors had expressed interest in having me join their research teams. When I sat my parents down to share my decision, their reaction was swift and brutal. I was being irresponsible, they told me. I was throwing away my future, abandoning my commitments, and proving that I didn't have the discipline for serious academic work. Medical school had been the plan, and changing course now showed a lack of character and follow-through. The worst part was listening to them compare me unfavorably to Emma. Emma, they said, had the courage to recognize when something wasn't right and take time to reconsider. Emma was mature enough to admit when she needed help. I apparently was just looking for an easy way out because pre-med was getting challenging. When I tried to explain that this wasn't about difficulty but about genuine passion and career fit, they dismissed my research and preparation as elaborate rationalization. When I mentioned that I'd already been accepted to the engineering program, they accused me of going behind their backs and making decisions without their input. Then came the ultimatum. If I changed majors, they would no longer support my education financially. They'd given me every opportunity to succeed in medicine, and if I chose to waste that opportunity, I'd have to fund the consequences myself. They weren't going to enable my lack of commitment the way they'd seen other parents do with unfocused children. The irony was devastating. Emma had literally dropped out of medical school and was living at home taking art classes on their dime, but I was the one showing lack of commitment for wanting to switch to a related field where I'd actually discovered my passion. But I was 20 years old, confident in my decision, and frankly tired of living my life according to their narrow definition of success. I took out student loans, transferred to the engineering program, and threw myself into my studies with more enthusiasm than I'd ever felt for pre-med. The next 2 years were financially challenging but academically incredible. I excelled in my engineering courses, landed internships at medical device companies, and began building a network in a field where I genuinely saw my future. Meanwhile, Emma had returned to medical school and was struggling again. Our parents' updates about Emma became increasingly strained. They said she was having difficulty with her clinical rotations. The hands-on aspects of medicine were more challenging than she'd expected. She was considering whether this path was really right for her after all. When Emma dropped out of medical school the second time, 3 years and over $200,000 in tuition later, our parents' response was identical to the first time. Understanding, supportive, completely free of the judgment they'd shown me. Emma was being mature and self-aware, they insisted. She was brave enough to admit when something wasn't working. This time, Emma moved back home and announced she wanted to become a teacher. Elementary education, she thought, would be more fulfilling and better suited to her personality. Our parents enrolled her in an education master's program immediately and began praising her newfound clarity about her calling. Meanwhile, I was completing my engineering degree with highest honors, had been offered a full fellowship for graduate school, and was being recruited by several major medical device companies. When I shared these achievements with my parents, their responses were polite but distant. They seemed unable to celebrate my success in a field they'd refused to support. The breaking point came during my graduate school years. I was working on groundbreaking research in cardiac device technology, had published papers in major journals, and was part of a team developing innovations that could save thousands of lives. I was also supporting myself entirely through fellowships and research assistantships, proving every day that my decision to follow my passion had been exactly right. Emma, meanwhile, had decided that teaching elementary school was too demanding and had switched to substitute teaching, which allowed her more flexibility and creativity. Our parents continued to support her financially while she figured out her next move, but here's where their hypocrisy became impossible to ignore. During my second year of graduate school, I received an incredible opportunity. A major medical device company offered me a paid internship that would advance my research and virtually guarantee a job offer upon graduation. The only catch was that I needed to take a semester off from coursework to focus on the project full-time. When I called to share this exciting news, hoping they might finally see the value of the path I'd chosen, my parents' reaction was swift and harsh. Taking time off from school, they said, was a pattern of avoidance I'd learned from watching Emma. Successful people didn't abandon their commitments for temporary opportunities. I was showing the same lack of follow-through that had concerned them when I changed majors. The contrast was staggering. Emma had dropped out of an expensive medical program twice, with their full support and financial backing. But I couldn't take a single semester for a career-advancing opportunity without being accused of following her bad example. That conversation revealed something I'd been trying not to see for years. My parents didn't actually value responsibility, commitment, or follow-through. They valued the appearance of these things, and more importantly, they valued being needed. Emma's failures made her dependent on them, which fed their sense of importance and control. My successes made me independent, which threatened their sense of relevance in my life. But the real revelation came 2 years later, at what should have been a celebration of my achievements. I had just defended my master's thesis, accepted a position with a leading medical device company at a starting salary of $95,000, and been invited to present my research at an international conference. Emma had decided to go back to school again, this time for graphic design, and our parents were once again funding her educational exploration while praising her artistic sensibilities and creative spirit. At my graduation celebration, which I'd organized and paid for myself, I listened to my parents tell extended family members about Emma's exciting new direction and artistic talents. When relatives asked about my achievements, my parents offered brief, almost embarrassed acknowledgments before changing the subject back to Emma's creative journey. That night, my aunt pulled me aside with a concerned expression. She'd been watching the family dynamics for years, she said, and wanted to make sure I understood what was happening. My parents, she explained, had created a system where Emma's needs always came first, because Emma's needs were always greater. My competence and independence had become a threat to their sense of purpose as parents. But what my aunt told me next shattered everything I thought I understood about my family's financial priorities. She'd been talking to my grandmother, who had been growing increasingly concerned about my parents' spending patterns. In total, they had invested over $300,000 in Emma's various educational pursuits, living expenses, and creative explorations. They had contributed exactly $0 to my education after I changed majors. Even more shocking was learning that they'd been telling extended family members that they were supporting both of us equally through school. They'd been taking credit for my academic achievements while portraying themselves as devoted parents investing in both daughters' futures. The lies extended beyond finances. They'd been telling people that I was studying biomedical engineering as preparation for medical school, maintaining the fiction that I was still pursuing medicine even years after I'd clearly committed to engineering. They couldn't accept that I'd found success and fulfillment outside their original vision for my life. But the final straw came when I learned about the conversation they'd had with my grandmother about my career prospects. Despite my obvious success, published research, and excellent salary, they'd expressed concerns to family members about whether engineering was a stable field for women and whether I'd be able to maintain employment long-term. They were literally undermining my reputation and achievements within our extended family, while simultaneously taking credit for supporting my education. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. That's when I realized I needed to set boundaries that protected both my emotional well-being and my reputation. I started by having honest conversations with extended family members about my actual experiences and achievements. I shared my research publications, salary information, and career trajectory, making it clear that I had funded my own education and built my success independently. The response from relatives was eye-opening. Many had suspected that something was off about my parents' version of events, particularly since my obvious success didn't match their subtle implications about my choices and prospects. Several family members apologized for not recognizing the disparity in treatment and expressed admiration for what I'd accomplished despite the lack of support. But the real reckoning came at Emma's next family gathering announcement. She had decided yet again that her current path wasn't fulfilling and wanted to pursue nursing school. Our parents were already researching programs and discussing how to fund this latest educational direction. This time I couldn't stay silent. When my parents began explaining Emma's new direction and asking for family support and understanding, I calmly asked whether they thought it was important for people to finish what they started before beginning something new. The question hung in the air awkwardly before my father responded that every person's journey was different and that supporting someone through their process of finding their path was what loving families did. I nodded thoughtfully and then asked whether they felt their approach to supporting Emma's educational exploration was consistent with how they'd handled my decision to switch majors once, early in my academic career, to pursue a field where I'd ultimately found great success. The silence was deafening. Extended family members began glancing at each other as the implications of my question became clear. Here was Emma announcing her fourth major educational change in 7 years, receiving unconditional support and financing. And here was I, who had made one thoughtful transition early in my career and had been cut off financially and criticized for lack of commitment. My uncle finally asked directly about the difference in treatment, and for the first time, my parents had to acknowledge in front of the entire family that they had handled our educational decisions very differently. Their explanations were weak and contradictory, ranging from claims that I had been more financially capable of independence to suggestions that Emma needed more support due to her sensitive nature. But the family wasn't buying it anymore. My cousin, who worked in finance, had done the math on Emma's educational costs and was visibly shocked at the investment my parents had made in someone who had never completed a program. My grandmother, who had been subsidizing some of Emma's expenses without realizing the full scope of my parents' financial support, looked betrayed and angry. The gathering ended with my parents defensive and isolated, Emma embarrassed and confused, and me finally feeling validated after years of gaslighting and manipulation. But the real vindication came 6 months later, when my research team's cardiac device received FDA approval and began saving lives in hospitals across the country. The local newspaper ran a feature story about my work, including details about my educational journey and the innovative technology we'd developed. The article mentioned my transition from pre-med to biomedical engineering as an example of following one's passion, despite initial resistance from others. It included quotes from my professors about my dedication and natural aptitude for engineering, and detailed the impact our device was having on patient outcomes. Suddenly, my parents were sharing the article on social media and telling everyone about their daughter, the biomedical engineer whose research was saving lives. They began taking credit for encouraging my interest in engineering and supporting my educational choices. The rewriting of history was so blatant and shameless that several family members called to express their disgust. My aunt forwarded me screenshots of my mother's Facebook posts, claiming that they had always believed in my engineering potential and were proud of supporting my transition into such meaningful work. That's when I knew I needed to establish clear, permanent boundaries. I scheduled a conversation with my parents and calmly explained that their pattern of taking credit for my success while having actively opposed and undermined my choices was unacceptable. I outlined specific examples of their lack of support, their financial favoritism toward Emma, and their attempts to undermine my reputation within the family. I told them that moving forward, our relationship would need to be based on honesty about the past and respect for my autonomy in the present. I would no longer tolerate attempts to revise history or take credit for achievements they had actively tried to prevent. Their response was predictably defensive and manipulative. They accused me of being ungrateful, holding grudges, and failing to understand the complexity of parenting different children with different needs. They insisted that they had always supported my success, just in different ways than I had recognized. But I had learned to recognize gaslighting, and I wasn't going to accept their version of reality anymore. I calmly stated that their perception of events differed significantly from documented facts, and that until they could acknowledge the disparity in how they had treated Emma and me, our relationship would remain superficial and limited. The conversation ended with them angry and me feeling liberated. For the first time in years, I had stated my truth clearly without apologizing for my success or accepting blame for their favoritism. Over the following months, I maintained polite but distant contact with my parents, while building stronger relationships with extended family members who had witnessed and validated my experiences. I continued excelling in my career, earning promotions and recognition for my research contributions. Emma, meanwhile, had dropped out of nursing prerequisites after 1 semester and was exploring online marketing certification programs. Our parents continued funding her explorations while expressing bewilderment about why I had become so distant and difficult to please. The breakthrough came 18 months later, when my grandmother decided to have a direct conversation with my parents about the family dynamics she'd been observing. As the family matriarch and someone who had been financially supporting Emma without realizing the full scope of my parents' investment, she had both the authority and the information needed to confront them effectively. My grandmother laid out the financial disparity in stark terms, over $400,000 invested in Emma's various pursuits with no completed degrees or career prospects, versus zero investment in my education, despite my obvious success and meaningful career contributions. She expressed disappointment in their favoritism and concern about the message they were sending about responsibility and follow-through. But more importantly, she addressed their attempts to take credit for my achievements while having actively opposed my choices. She had kept copies of conversations where they had expressed doubt about my career prospects and had evidence of their attempts to undermine my reputation within the family. My parents' response to my grandmother was different than their response to me. They couldn't gaslight or manipulate someone with her authority and access to information. For the first time, they were forced to acknowledge the disparity in treatment and the dishonesty of their recent attempts to claim credit for my success. My grandmother's intervention didn't immediately repair our relationship, but it established a new baseline of honesty that made meaningful conversation possible. My parents began acknowledging, grudgingly, that their approach to supporting Emma and me had been inconsistent and that their criticism of my career change had been unfair given the positive outcomes. More importantly, they stopped taking public credit for my achievements and began referring people to me directly when they had questions about my work or career. It was a small step, but it represented recognition of my autonomy and agency in building my own success. Today, 3 years after that family gathering where I finally spoke my truth, my relationship with my parents is cordial but boundaried. They've learned not to minimize my achievements or take credit for my choices, and I've learned not to expect the unconditional support and celebration they've always given Emma. Emma is currently pursuing her 6th different career direction, with our parents' continued financial and emotional support. I've been promoted twice, have led research teams that have developed multiple life-saving medical devices, and have built financial security and professional recognition entirely through my own efforts. The difference is that I no longer need my parents' validation to know my worth. I have external validation from colleagues, patients whose lives have been improved by my work, and professional achievements that speak for themselves. I've built relationships with people who celebrate my successes without needing to diminish them to elevate someone else. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned to recognize and reject manipulation disguised as family loyalty. I understand now that healthy families celebrate individual achievements without requiring them to fit predetermined molds, and that love shouldn't be conditional on meeting other people's expectations for your life. If you're watching this and recognizing your own family dynamics, I want you to know that you're not imagining the favoritism or the manipulation. Trust your perceptions, document the patterns, and don't let anyone convince you that asking for equal treatment is asking for too much. Your success doesn't need anyone else's permission or approval. Your achievements are valid whether or not your family recognizes them. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to earn recognition from people who benefit from withholding it. The hardest part of setting boundaries with family isn't the initial confrontation, it's maintaining them when people try to guilt you back into old patterns. But every time you protect your energy and achievements from people who would diminish them, you're investing in your own growth and modeling healthy relationships for others who might be watching and learning. I'd love to hear from others who have experienced family favoritism or had to set boundaries around taking credit for your achievements. How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give to someone just recognizing these patterns in their own family? Your stories and insights could help someone else who's struggling with similar dynamics. And if this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their perceptions are valid and their achievements matter, regardless of whether their family is able to celebrate them appropriately. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is witness each other's truth and confirm that we're not alone in these experiences.